I'm happy to say that the Australian Music Vault is proud to welcome a man who's been writing and performing music in the land of Oz since he was a schoolboy in the Pink Finks.
Now I'm in the vault.
Now you're in the vault, from the Finks to the vault. Yeah. Who came up with that name, Ross Wilson?
The Pink Finks was a total accident. Well, not total. I'll tell you what happened. We were schoolboys, right? Yeah. And we answered an ad in the paper. It said, and I've still got it cut out in it somewhere. It says R&B bands wanted, because at that time it was like the big explosion post-Beatles.
So what, 60?
64.
64.
Post-Beatles of the more bluesy bands like the Stones and, them and...
Yardbirds.
Early Manfred Mann, all that kind of stuff. So we liked that kind of stuff. So we called, someone said, might have been Ross Hannaford, because he was a bit of an arty kid. He said we'd call ourselves the Fauves, as the wild animal art movement, right?
Yes.
So we were called the Fauves. And then we answered the ad in the paper, R&B bands wanted, no experience necessary. We said, that's us. That's us, get on the phone. And it was these two slightly older than us guys. I was 16 and Hannaford was like 13 and there was a couple in the middle. And these guys were like, 18 or 19 or something. So, oh, well, we want to do this and we want to do that. But, that name, no one knows what it means. You've got to change the name. We've got a name for you. We're going to put you in, like, pink shirts and stuff, and we're going to be called the Pink Finks. And we're kind of going, oh, yeah, big deal, And so then they got us a gig on a Christmas thing. So it was around about Christmas time. We only just started a month or so before. And it was out at Footscray somewhere and for charity. And on the bill was a young Olivia Newton-John and a few other people. So we went out there for this run through the week before. And of course, we're pretty terrible. But the whole thing fell over anyway. Right. But they'd had posters up and it said, instead of the Pink Finks, someone had heard it over the phone or something, it had the Pink Finks. We went, oh, that's better. That's better. And also, we've had a poster out now. We can't change our name now because everyone knows it's because of this poster. Like, yeah, right. So that's how it came about.
Great. So it's a four-piece band.
Yeah.
It's you.
Five-piece.
Oh, okay. Give us the lineup.
Well, it was Ross Hannaford on guitar, a guy called Rick Dalton on guitar, he was very, very mover and shaker sort of young guy.
Yeah.
And Jeff Ratz on bass. We were all still at school, and my mate Richard Franklin on the drums, because he played in sort of trad jazz bands and things like that.
Right.
So we got him in. But how it all happened was I went to this local church dance where my friend Keith Glass, who later became well known for various other things, had a band on and they were playing Stones song. He said, come on down and, you're playing a bit of harp. I know you're getting pretty good, so play a bit of harp. So I got sat in and I'm going, he's singing I'm a King Bee or something and I'm going, wah, wah, wah. And the band that had been on before us were they'd been playing like instrumentals. Remember how everyone used to play instrumentals, like the Ventures and the Shadows and stuff? And they came up to me afterwards and said, gee, that's the kind of stuff we want to do and you can play the harmonica and can you sing? And I went, yeah, I can sing, no worries. So we'll come along to this garage, Ross Hannaford's garage, next weekend, and we'll see what happens. So I get there, and they've already got a singer, right? So another one of their friends, because it's all schoolboy stuff.
Yeah.
So I get up and I have a bit of a, wah, 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 and warble away, and suddenly he's out and I'm in. That's how brutal show business showbiz can be, that's right.
And Ross Hannaford is 13.
He's just turning 13.
So he's 12.
And he was, he ended up like a big tall beanpole. He was about half that size and sort of round, and you can see the photographs of him. But we were all very, very primitive. But that's the whole thing about when you start playing, if you're with sort of some other people who are reasonably good, you'll all kind of rise together, So Hannaford had natural talent. I had a natural kind of inborn gift of I could sing and I could pick up things quickly. I learnt how to play blues harmonica very, very quickly.
Because didn't you learn that after a car accident?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all part of the legend.
Yeah, tell us that story.
Well, I was hitchhiking down. I was sort of hanging around with the group of surfer kids at my school.
Because
and
down the coast, Mentone or
We were
Bowie
around
or...
I lived in Hampton, and the other guys from Pink Finks lived in Brighton. And there used to be the Brighton Beach bars, which aren't there anymore.
Yeah.
And in between the bars and the pier, which is also not there anymore, there was a bit of a sandbank and a break, and people used to practice surfing there. There was a bit of a wave came up. So there was a bit of a scene there. And so I was hanging around with those guys, and I had a surfboard, and someone had taken it down the coast, and I was hitchhiking, got up one morning and started hitchhiking down to Torquay to get my board back. And managed to get as far as sort of where the Mission for Seaman is, around there.
Yeah.
Docklands now.
Yes.
And got hit by a car because I didn't pay attention when I got out of this other car.
So you were a pedestrian?
Yeah. Well, I was, running across the road
Yeah.
to get to the next vantage point, And so I ended up in Prince Henry's Hospital. None of those places are there anymore.
Yeah.
All of the summer holidays. And what happened was none of my surfer friends came in to see me, but the other group of music enthusiast ones, they did. They did. So when I didn't even think about it. When I got out of hospital eventually, and I still had to wear this thing on my leg, but I went back to school, I gravitated to the music guys. And so then by the end of that year, that's when the Pink Finks came together,
And am I right also, and it's probably part of the legend, that at 10 you saw Johnny O'Keefe, Jerry Lee Lewis and Buddy Holly?
That's true, because I was, very into music. I used to listen
with your dad?
Used to the radio all the time, yeah. And so I'd, listen to like Crash Craddock and stuff like that, boom, boom, baby, you're the one I adore. Yeah. I liked anything kind of up and that, and anything sort of R&B-ish as well. Like I remember I bought a Huey Piano Smith and the Clowns record, and of course he's God now,
Yeah.
So but I just liked what I heard on the radio. And Chuck Berry and things like that. So here I was about 10 and a bit, and Lee Gordon's next big show was coming, and it happened to be like Buddy Holly in the Crickets. I had That'll Be the Day was one of my singles that I had, and Jerry Lee Lewis, and I just a friend of mine had a whole lot of shaking going on. We used to play that over and over and over. And I said, we've got to go to this show. Dad, can you get tickets? And he had a friend with 2 sons, and we were all friends, so we all went along together.
With the dads?
With the dads, and we were sitting up in the bleachers and saw all that crazy stuff happening, and, bodges and widgies all running up and down the aisles, and I'm thinking, gee, this is pretty wild, wonder what's. And I looked around at my dad thinking, he might take us home if it gets too wild. And he had a big grin on his face. He loved it because he came from like a big band era and all of that stuff, and just, groovy kind of stuff. So he was just loving it. So. And
could you tell a difference between the Americans and the Australians? So you got Jerry Lee Lewis and Buddy Holly, and then you got the local boy.
Well, you see, we had our own hero, who was Johnny O'Keefe, and he had 6 o'clock rock.
Yeah.
Which, that was the equivalent of what Countdown became later on the ABC, promoting Australian music.
Yeah.
Because the ABC's constitution, as I like to point out to people, is to promote things Australian.
Of course.
And so we used to tune in on to 6 o'clock rock, I think it was Sundays, and, come on, everybody, it's 6 o'clock, so like they would have all the local luminary, mainly Sydney people, because it was done in Sydney. So, Johnny Devlin and blah, 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 and they'd sing rock hits, but he being such a kind of entrepreneurial sort of a guy, started writing his own songs, Wild One. So there he is at the Wild One on stage at Festival Hall in Melbourne, trying to upstage everybody, pretty successfully. Everyone's loving him, and he's got like the guys playing the saxophones, like he's had the DJs and the Deltones, right? And the DJs had those big baritone sax, which I just loved the sound of, and I thought, when I grow up a bit, I'm going to get one of those. I never did though. And so he's rolling around, and then I can't remember the specifics of the show that much, But I do recall sort of having this picture of Jerry Lee Lewis, pounding away at the piano and flicking his hair up and down, and then he'd get a big red comb and comb his hair back and start another one, And I guess they were already all on stage. They're probably only about 20 minutes each, at the most. Around have like a handful of hits and off they'd go.
And Johnny O'Keefe really was wild.
Yeah, I think he was rolling around on the ground and all kinds of stuff, Anyway, that was quite an experience. When I came away from that, I'm still listening to the radio all the time. Music's evolving. And I just have these kind of picture in my mind, what I'd do if I was on stage at Festival Hall. I'd do cartwheels and I'd jump backflips and all this kind of stuff was going on in my head, But it took a few more years. Not that many more years. It was about, 5 years later, 6 years later, actually performed at Festival Hall on the Battle of the Bands with the Pink Finks.
Did you really?
Yeah, there's a big colour picture of us in everybody's magazine.
That's right.
Yeah.
Did you do Louie Louie?
Well, we did. I think we had that out by then, yeah.
Which was a wild, I was listening to it the other day, your version. It's raw, but it's got an incredible energy. Yeah. Were you aware that you were making something that was pretty primal?
Yeah, because we were thinking, I guess we'd rehearse at the weekends or whenever we had time. And still had to go to school, so our parents put restrictions on how much we could do. But, it goes to this double time bit in the middle. And so, that's part of our arrangement. I didn't actually know the words. I made up my own words. That's one of the special things about the Pink Finks version. It's completely the wrong words because I couldn't decipher, the version everyone knew was the Kingsman. Yeah. And I couldn't decipher what the guy was singing, so I just wrote my own words.
No internet, no lyric search.
Well, there probably could have been if I'd taken the trouble, but I didn't think of that.
What else did the Pink Finks do? What other songs?
Yeah, well, we were by then I was sort of into tracing things backwards. You might hear the Stones do something and then you'd go, I'd read the label and it says, that's Solomon Burke or Otis
Slim
Redding.
Harpo.
Let's find some Otis. Oh, wow, those Otis Redding, he's really good, So I started collecting James Brown and all of the original guys that the Stones got their inspiration from. Slim Harpo, I'm a King Bee.
Yeah.
Got all into those things very quickly.
But then you went a little bit. Oh no, you go.
Oh no, so the next recordings that we did, for instance, Howling Wolf song, Backdoor Man.
Right.
Yeah, but ours was based on sort of Howling Wolf and John Hammond, who was the white blues guy. So it was a mixture of those things. Yeah.
But then you went a little bit experimental. I mean, Party Machine. Procession.
Yeah. Well, but Party Machine was like the crucible in which I started writing songs.
With Mike Rudd?
Yeah, Mike Rudd was on bass, but he didn't really write much in those days. He wrote one or two things, after a while, when we'd been going for a while. Ross Hannaford on lead guitar, who was going to art school by that stage, and a guy called Peter Curtin, who is still around, and he ended up being he was on drums, he ended up being a airline pilot in America. So, he comes back home occasionally.
So what are you writing with the Party Machine?
We had a piano at my where I lived with my folks and my brother. And so I started, just working out simple chords, and I'd sit there and write things. And the first real song that I came up with that wasn't like a copy of some other song, that you might get a blues and then just change the lyrics and make it your song, was this song called The Gentle Art, which was the flip side of the first and only Party Machine single. And on the A side is a song called You've All Got to Go, which I wrote with Ross Hannaford. So the whole thing then was right. And I was working at the public service as a clerk and I had my own phone and a desk and all that. So I'd finish a file or something, having these ideas going around in my brain, go home and work them out,
And what style was it?
Oh, very...
Blues,
it was
R&B?
No, there was no real kind of... It was white boy in the suburbs style in that it had everything in it, everything I'd ever heard, plus the new things I was hearing. And the things that really turned it around was when I heard, see, I was a huge fan of early John Lee Hooker, where he's just playing by himself, or he's playing with a band and they're going all over the place. It's just anarchy, you know.
Yeah.
And I loved that. It was so out of control. And then I heard Frank Zappa, and I actually hated it at first because I didn't kind of get it, you know. And I said, a friend of mine who was playing in the party machine, early party machine, playing sax, Mike Edwards, played a bit of sax, a pretty musical guy, you know.
Yeah.
Loved Bob Dylan and stuff. He got a hold of it. I said, have a listen to this. It's a double album. I think I've done my dough, you know. It's not that good, you know. And he came back to me, he said, you know, that's really good. It's got all this advanced stuff in it and great chords. And I went, really? And I thought, I better have another listen, you know. And I started to understand that it was using satire and parody and all of that, and they were really great players. And I mean, the singer in that band was a fantastic Ray Collins, who passed away a few years ago.
So, all right, so you're writing your own songs with the party machine, but then you go to England and join the procession?
Well, the party machine started to get enough work that we actually turned professional, and I left my 2.5-year job that I'd had since I left school. And we were all, you know, I think Hannah was still at art school. But
and playing gigs in Melbourne?
Playing gigs all over the place.
Whereabouts?
And we
Birdies?
had a manager.
What are the gigs?
Everywhere. There was so many dances like Opus and
Q Club?
Q Club, yeah.
At that time?
You know, zillions of gigs to
Thumping
play.
Tum?
Well, see, the whole thing that you're talking about is how there was such a thriving scene because you could evolve quite quickly because you had places to play.
Yeah.
And that's one of the great things about that time. And you could play some new song you'd written and you throw in a couple of covers as well, but you could play a bunch of your own stuff. And people, you know, we used to, like I say, play at the Thumping Tum because one of our early managers was one of the guys that ran that. So if we didn't have a gig, we'd go play there, you know. And you had a place to play where people would go, oh, yeah, you know.
So you might be playing, 4 or 5 times a week?
Maybe, yeah. And then we got some interstate gigs after we went pro, you know. But we went interstate and got completely ripped off. So we came back. All our equipment even got stolen.
Where?
So we had to come home on a train, you know.
To Sydney?
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, we played up in Brisbane and got ripped off. And then we made it to a week at this place in Newcastle. And the guy who was helping us set up stage and that, we got up one morning and our van and all our equipment had gone. And that was that.
You never got it back?
We did. They found him camping in the bush. He'd sort of gone. He's living in the van.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
In your van?
Meantime, I got a call from Brian Peacock and the procession guys who were over in England. And they said, oh, listen, we decided, so-and-so left and we decided, you know, we need a front man and we liked what you're doing in the party machine. And because we were so kind of shattered by all the things that happened here, and I thought, well, okay, I might as well take up this opportunity. And the time I spent in hospital when I was 16 and I was now like 20 or something, or 21, yeah. And I came into a couple of grand insurance money, right?
Right.
So I went, okay, got enough for a ticket. Hey guys, what do you think? They said, yeah, that's a good idea. You know, I'm going to go back to art school. Hannah's, you know, this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, good luck to you, man. So I went off and spent some time over there. That was an amazing experience.
I bet. And recorded at Olympic
We did,
Studios?
but nothing ever came out. Yeah, we recorded there, and it was around the time the Stones were doing Honky Tonk Women.
Yeah.
Because Mick came in to see the engineer, and we're going, oh, what are you doing, Mick? And he says, oh, we're recording this song about sailors in Paris, which turned out later to be Country Honk.
Yeah.
And by the time when Procession were winding up at the end of that summer, I decided it wasn't going to go anymore. We got our last gig was a student cruise, playing on a student cruise from England to New York and back, and Honky Tonk Women had just come out, and we go, oh, that's that song Mick was talking about, you know. So it was amazing. We landed in New York on the weekend of Woodstock, so New York was sort of empty, you know. We went down to the village and there's no one there, you know.
Really?
Yeah.
Did
So
you?
we're only there for 24 hours,
Right.
you know, so we had
And
to
then
get
back
back
on
on
the
the
boat.
boat. Yeah,
So what were you'd play every night or?
pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. This is with Procession.
Yeah.
Okay, but after that, next one is the Sons of Vegetal Mothers.
Well, I came back to Australia. I was liking it to the Ulysses Odyssey, you know, because I had to get home with no money. They'd found my stolen guitar in a pawn shop somehow. Keith
Right.
Glass discovered it, that's right, in King's Cross. And so I got my dad to sell that and sent me some money. And so me and my new bride, Pat, started hitchhiking back to Australia and ended up going through all these places that you sort of can't go anymore. We went through Syria and Kuwait and Iran and, you know,
Great.
Turkey and
And you came
West
back.
Pakistan. We went to Quetta where Al-Qaeda come from. It was
And you were just
bizarre.
a couple of hippies hitchhiking.
Couple of hippies, yeah, trying to get to the next
Yeah.
spot and spend as little as possible.
Yeah.
You know?
But you did have the beginnings of a song, Eagle Rock.
That's right.
So
I
in
started
London-
writing. One of the things when I was playing with Procession, I sort of started to get into guitar a bit, and I bought a guitar in London and was mucking around and had a few singles and things I'd brought over with me and a few other things, and me and Mick Rogers, who was their guitarist, who later went on to play with Manfred Mann's Earth Band.
Yeah.
He and I had similar kind of like harking back to the early stuff, you know, and we were both listening to this Rock Around the Clock album, Bill Haley going, man, they really had something, you know, and we're sort of getting off on that. So I was trying to play some bluesy kind of things like my man John Lee Hooker. So I came up with boom-ga-doodly, doom-ga-doodly, doom-ga-doodly, this droney boogie riff.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I came up with to go over the top of that was boom, da 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 da. And how that came about was because I was such a bad guitarist, you form an A chord there and you don't have to move. So I'd find these things, da 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 da, you know, move one finger sort of thing, keep the bass going, and that's how that riff came up. And I went to Mick, gee, I think I've got something here, you know.
Yeah.
You haven't heard this before, have you? Because it seems sort of too good.
Yeah.
And he's going, nah, that's pretty good though. So I go, need another chord, then start again.
Great.
A, E, you know. And
But there were a lyric?
I picked up this. Sunday Times had a series about music A to Z.
Yeah.
And so in about the first supplement that they brought out, it had blues. Blues music came from blah, blah, cotton fields, this, that, and the other thing, you know. And they had a picture of these people in a juke joint, and they're all going like this, you know. Said, cutting the pigeon wing and doing the Eagle Rock. And I went, well, this song harks back to the Mississippi blues stuff that influenced my trying to pick like that.
Right.
So maybe we'll do the Eagle Rock, you know, Eagle Rock. And that's how the song was born. But I didn't come up with the chorus because then I had to leave and I didn't have a guitar anymore.
Yeah.
Things are going around in my head, you know, thinking of things while we're on the road and hitchhiking, catching buses and whatever. And finally got back to Melbourne after a time in Darwin. We landed in Darwin without any money.
Yeah.
Finally got back to Melbourne and got a guitar again. And I went, I still got it, you know, I haven't forgotten that. Needs something else, needs a chorus. So I only knew like about 3 or 4 chords. So I go, okay, A, yeah. Hey, good old Eagle Rock. G. The thing that really sets it apart is where I go to B minor. So I've gone to this modulation out of A.
Yeah.
It's a sort of G, D, B minor, A, E again. So it suddenly had this chorus. And the whole thing about writing songs, which I came to learn, you have, and Daddy Cool was very good at this, you have tension. We'd sit on that riff and we'd grind that riff, you know. Hannah's going, doing good, doing. Wayne Duncan's going, boom, 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 boom. Gary's like this,
Yeah.
and we
It's
would just
hypnotic.
grind that thing, you know. Then you get to the chorus, hey, hey, hey. So you've got tension and release, and that's what songwriting, particularly kind of pop songs, and that's what they're about, you know.
So was Hannah a part of Eagle Rock at the beginning? So you've come back, you're not in a band?
No.
Or
I went round to see my old mates, you know, so, hey, Mike, what are you doing now? Mike Rudd, he's going, well, I formed this band called Spectrum. So I had to make a living. But because of his experience with Party Machine, he told me a few years later, he said he had decided, I'm only going to play my own music. I haven't written many songs, but I'm going to write all my own songs from now on. And he did. And so they had this pretty crazy stuff going on. He had some good players. A guy on keyboard who was really good. And it was a good band, you know, and quite different.
Yeah.
And I said, what do you got? He said, I got a few songs. He played me a few songs, and he played I'll Be Gone. I said, that's really good, because I've got a sort of pop ear, you know. Yeah. He's playing all his out there stuff, but he had this one song that was very kind of simple. So that was my contribution. But his contribution to me was that Spectrum were being managed by this new group of upstarts called Let It Be. Yeah. And they were in competition with the old school, Ambo, I think it was, that eventually became Premier Artists years later, you know. So, and they were to get their artists happening, like Captain Matchbox Whoopee Band, Spectrum.
Company Cane, or is that a...
They were from Sydney, but the local guys, there were a few others too, and sort of crazy, you know, juggling and sort of kind of hippie stuff.
Carlton.
And they were putting on these dances. And so anyway, I was and trying to get my songs away, right? So I said to Mike, what, have you got anything good? And I said, well, this might suit you. And I had Make Your Stash.
Yeah.
Da, 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 based on the Holtz thing. Da, 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 da. So he went, I love that.
On the Planets.
So, yeah. So he took that, and they ended up doing that and an old sort of Party Machine thing on their very first album. And because of that, I also went to see Ross Hannaford. He had this country rock band with the Party Machine's old member, Mike Edwards, and his brother. And they loved, because he loved Bob Dylan, Mike Edwards, they were doing all like Lay Lady Lay and all this. Right. And they put out a version of that as Quinn. So I went, country rock, you might like this. And I played them Eagle Rock. You know, I said, this goes here and this goes here. And you want to, okay, leave you with it, guys. And then...
So you gave it to them?
Yeah, I was trying to get some songs away, you know, and it was Hannah, you know, so like... so Hannah said later, he said, when you left, they kind of went, no, we don't want to do that.
Really?
So, yeah. So I decided I was writing this crazy music, and I thought, well, I'll form like a super band kind of temporary thing. And so we had Mike Rudd, Hannaford, various other people, Gary Young, who I met at this book warehouse where I was working, and he knew Wayne, and so we had all these things. So then we had a crazy band playing this crazy music, Sons of Vegetal Mother. And we had a place to play, which was where the Let It Be guys had the underground dances at Cathedral Hall and put on the TF Much Ballroom. So there I was, you know, with a few months back on the scene, completely reinvented. Yeah. And that's where the core members of that band, you know, Hannaford, Duncan, Young and me, I said, I've got this other thing I want to do. Doo-wop, you know, doo-wop and old R&B, and we don't need to have a full band for that. We just get the four of us because we could all sing, and you know, and they understood where I was coming from, and it just went clunk like that.
It was pretty quick.
Overnight, yeah. We played Eagle Rock. We'd already played Eagle Rock with Sons of Vegetal Mother, but we played like stripped down version with the four-piece, and the guys from Let It Be came around and went, and with Jerry Humphreys, and said, what are you doing? I said, we'll come round to the rehearsal. I said, okay. So there we are, we're going, and doo-wopping and Eagle rocking and that, and they kind of went, like that. And Julie just said, you got to play at the dance, you know. So there we are. We went up to TF Much, and
Yeah.
They had like Sons of Vegetal Mother, someone else on, and then Daddy Cool.
Oh, so
Daddy Cool played the first gig. Place just went nuts.
Yeah.
They'd all been sitting around
yeah.
stoned and on the floor and listening to experimental stuff. And they went, this is what we really want to do. Let's all dance, you know?
And were you doing all those, Little Darling and Duke of Earl and
Yeah.
what else?
A lot of things that were from my singles collection as a kid.
Yeah.
That'll be the day, you know?
And Hannah, and you had that Hannah's voice.
We had the whole thing. We had like 2 tenors, Hannah's bass voice, and I was a tenor, but I could do all the falsetto stuff if I had to.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, Peter Luscombe still raves about your falsetto, Cherry Pie and Cadillac. I mean,
that was a lot of fun, and I just did it sort of naturally. I was so we were so getting off on the whole thing. We didn't really think about, this is going to be real big or anything like that. We were just having a good time, and it sounded so good.
But then Eagle Rock, was that the first one? First single,
yeah.
Yeah, and it just exploded.
Well, we literally kind of took one summer playing around Melbourne for us to become like this overnight sensation. And we played Melbourne Town Hall with Billy Thorpe. He was headlining.
Yeah.
But everyone just went nuts, you know. So then about a few weeks later, we had our own Melbourne Town Hall, well, a month or something. And I knew John McDonald, who ran the disc store, because I used to go in there and buy all my import records. So he kind of knew what was going on around the scene from who would be buying records in his store, you know. And he'd started a label called Sparmac with Ken Sparks. So it was Ken Sparks, John McDonald, Sparmac. Right. And Robbie Porter turned up on the scene, who used to be Rob E.G., but he'd been living in the States. McDonald's was about to buy Ken Sparks' share of the label because he wanted to have a label, do some stuff. And John McDonald said to him, "You got to come see this band, you know. It's this guy, I've been hanging around for years and he's sort of got this band happening and it's really good." So they turned up at the town hall Melbourne Town Hall where we were headlining, and this is no joke. People were actually hanging off the balcony. I remember thinking, that guy's going to get hurt, you know. Someone's like this and pull him back up and all that. And they did big conga lines out into the street, into Swanston Street, back up the stairs and in again, you know.
With your encouragement as lead singer.
People just did it themselves.
Well, maybe was it a reaction away from that Thorpe? I don't know. What did Thorpe think of Daddy Cool?
He loved us.
Did he?
Yeah, he loved us. What was strange is that later he hated Skyhooks.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that I produced. Skyhooks was the next big thing.
Why did he hate Skyhooks?
Probably because they were as cheeky as him, and he didn't. You know, that's my theory. They had 5 guys who were as cheeky as Billy Thorpe.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, but that first Daddy Cool album, not only Eagle Rock, but Come Back Again.
Come Back Again. It was like the sister
Hi
song.
Honey Ho.
No, that's on the next one.
That's on the second one. But Bomb Bomb.
It's about half originals and half oldies, you know. So it's a very kind of crude record, but it's got they really captured the sort of innocent thing that we had, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Next album wasn't innocent at all. We were kind of the corrupt Daddy Cool.
Yeah, that was Sex, Dope, Rock and Roll.
But the first one was definitely that whole kind of, that thing that I'd seen, how I felt at Festival Hall when I was 10 years old. It was that, let's get back to real basic kind of why we enjoyed it in the first place, you know, and delving into... It's a typical thing that happens with musos, you know. I'm sure that, like, the Hoodoo Gurus came out of a desire to sound like, you know, this earlier stuff that they'd heard, you know. Yeah.
So did Daddy Cool end up at Sunbury Music Festival?
We did eventually, but I think when the first Sunbury was on, we must have been out of the country or something. We went to America 3 times.
How was that, taking Daddy Cool to America?
Well, at first it was quite a shock. We
Coles to Newcastle.
That as well, yeah. There we are at the Whiskey A Go-Go, and Robbie Porter and his mate Steve Binder had done all this advanced guard stuff, which we felt a bit uncomfortable with. You know, sort of like, oh, there's the new Beatles and there's
too much. Lower the
well, we weren't used to that. You know, in Hollywood, you've got to overhype everything.
You do.
you know. I didn't understand that at the time. So they got a few record companies along to the whiskey where we were supporting Elvin Bishop Band, and for a few nights, and we got, basically it's the first time it had happened with Daddy Cool, but I got stage fright. I was like, you know, the first set was like pretty terrible.
Really?
And we came off and went, oh, that was just like, what happened, guys? And they're going, yeah, I don't know, it's just shit ass, you know. So we've gone through that. Second set, when we got to do it again, I don't know if it was the same night or the next night or something, we were fine.
It was better.
Much better.
Yeah.
And somebody from Warner Reprise had come along and gone, yeah, I can see with it. Yeah, let's sign these guys, you know. So we went. Our mission was successful. They already had a whole album, which was that's an interesting thing. See, Porter said, we're going to cut an album. We're not just going to just do one single. So we went and we cut the whole album in 2.5 days and nights, including Eagle Rock. He took it back to the States and he mixed it in the States. And that's one of the reasons it sounds a lot different to the other Australian records at the time, because the guy who mixed it was just a genius, this guy called John Golden, I think. And it's really dry. There's hardly any reverb on it, unless it was necessary.
Which was an American thing, or was it that guy in particular?
No, it's American. If you listen to, they don't overdo things. And it was also, you've got to remember, it was early days of stereo being a mass thing. So they'd put out an album that you can get a mono version and a stereo version, because people still didn't have their hi-fis at that stage. Yeah. So, but they mixed for stereo. So you'd have my guitar there, Hannaford's guitar there, you know?
Yeah.
And it's got that same kind of grinding guitar sound as Vanda and Young did a few years later with AC/DC. They didn't mess with it. They didn't drown it in echo. Yeah. Just want to capture the energy of the sounds of those
And did
guitars.
you take that, just jumping forward, into your production with Skyhooks?
To a certain extent, because I loved stereo, and I also didn't like the fact that so many. There's a typical kind of young act thing where. Also, it's because I listen to a lot of black music. Yeah. And they keep it like that too. Yeah. You know, they don't drench things in reverb. Over-reverbing things is like, you know, insecurity. So didn't like that much. You know, used effects when they were necessary or in an artful way.
And how did you come to produce Skyhooks? You saw them?
I saw them. After Daddy Cool broke up, as it turned out temporarily, I formed another band with Ross Hannaford, and that was partly through our American experiences where, as you said, Colston, Newcastle with doo-wop and everything, and going to America and going, wow, you know, I think we could do really, people like what we're doing, but I'd love to come here with a contemporary act. Yes. As I was doing before with Party Machine, Sons of Vegetal Mother, little bits of that bled into Daddy Cool, but Daddy Cool, see, we never thought that was going to be big, and it was just, to me, it was just like something I did, but it wasn't my life. It wasn't like, oh, I found something and I want to do that forever, you know? So it kind of wore itself out naturally. Yeah. And then it was like, well, let's do something that's more contemporary. We formed Mighty Kong. Mighty Kong didn't really look good on paper, but it didn't really kind of translate that well as a cohesive unit. Well, that was part of the learning experience of like, you know, hey, the chemistry is right. Yeah. You know? So sometimes the chemistry is right, sometimes it's not. Yeah. You can't just put things together and hope and go, that must work. Yeah. So it had really good people in the band, but the album we made wasn't all that good, and we kind of went, yeah. I said, one of the last gigs we did was at Melbourne Uni in that big room where they used to do all the gigs, CAF or something, and supported by Skyhooks. So I'm there early and I'm going, what's that? And they're all got crazy lame things on and they're taking the piss out of everything. I knew one of the guys in the band, and that was Bob Starkey's big brother, Peter, who had played in, like with Joe Camilleri, and they had little R&B bands. I went, what's all this about? And and another guy, the other guitarist was just Peter English, who had played with Captain Matchbox. I'm going, wow, who writes these songs? And they said, the bass player. And I went, So I went up and said, oh, man, there's something going on here.
Because what did they had all the big ones living in the 70s.
They hadn't written those all by that stage. They had a few, though.
Yeah.
They had Blue Jeans.
Turak Cowboy, maybe?
Maybe, I'm not sure.
But not the big hits.
Some of the things that they did later they were doing.
But you realised there was something.
Carlton, I think they might have had.
Yeah.
Love on the Radio, because Steve Hill, who was out front as a singer, he kind of invented some of that whole shtick that Shirley later took on, the whole send-up front man kind of thing.
So this is pre-Shirley?
Pre-Shirley and pre-Red and pre-Bongo.
Wow.
But with Freddie and Greg as the instigators,
And what did Greg say? You came up to him.
I said, well, I'm starting a music publishing company, and one of the reasons I wanted to do that was because I felt that the terms of deal as a songwriter, 50-50 was the sort of thing you'd do. You'd sign off your song to a publishing company and they'd take 50%, you'd take 50%. They're supposed to go and work those songs. And I felt a bit unfair. I said, listen, I'd like to sign you up as a writer, and because I was a bit flush in those days, having made a few bob from,
Eagle Rock
and whatever, and I'll give you an advance, like $300. He said, that's cool. He went off and bought a new bass amp.
Yeah.
And we started demoing his songs. Almost immediately, Peter Starkey left, Bongo came in, Peter English went off doing something, and Red came in. And it was sort of like, this is more interesting now.
Yeah.
So we started, and things really started to come together, and they started to work more as a unit, not just a sort of a crazy jamming band. So we were demoing. I'd take him in the studio, we'd demo.
And you're working on the songs with Greg? Are you saying, that lyric's...
No, I wasn't changing. I loved the lyrics.
Right.
Loved them. And I loved what they were doing, Sometimes I would make suggestions at demo level about, let's cut that out, goes too long.
Yeah.
Let's squash it up, things like that. As a publisher, as a, person who's interested in this kind of stuff. And I was trying to get other labels interested in it, because I was the publisher. There was a bit of interest, and then they played at one of the early Sunburys. It might have been the second or third one, maybe the third one, I think.
Yeah.
And didn't go down that well. Steve Hill saw himself on a video playback and went, I'm not a pop star. I'm too ugly, and he was bolshy too, and I'm too lefty, and I don't want to go in this showbiz and try to make it and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm out of here. So Greg and Freddie had worked with Graham Strawn, Shirley, and they went and tracked him down. And he was working on a cray boat or something down at Phillip Island, and they came back. So then they said, we've got a new singer. I said, good. So the first time I meet him, I'm going out to see them play at the Village Green or some similar thing, and I pull up at the lights, and this guy sticks his head out of the window and says something cheeky, which I can't remember what it was, but it was something to do, hey, Wilson, blah, 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 and I'm kind of like, meet the new lead singer. He gets up there and he starts going, I'm going, yes. Back into the demo thing. They started to get a really big reputation, just live performance. I'm getting much more serious about how to put it together. Demos are quite better constructed. They're working on all their guitar parts. I just make a few suggestions here and there.
Yeah.
I come in and there's just riffs flying around, bass riffs, guitar riffs. And so...
And mostly is that Greg driving that, or is Red putting in, is Shirley putting in?
Well, I wasn't there all the time, But the two guitarists would work together.
Yeah.
And Greg had a fair idea of what he wanted to do. He was an unconventional bass player. He'd come up with riffs as a structural kind of thing instead of just go boom, 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 and things would work around that. So yeah, they were the thing about most proud about them, is like by the time we did get finished and I put my hand up and say I'd like to produce them because I didn't want them tampered with by the hack producers. And I'd only ever produced like one Daddy Cool single or something before then, but we'd been in there doing all those demos. So I knew how the studio worked. The thing I'm most proud of is like at the time nobody sounded like them and there's still nobody that sounds like them.
Totally.
They're totally unique in music, the way the songs were constructed, the things that guitarists did together. I mean, it's the way Freddie played the drums, everything about it is their sound.
Yeah.
And the way Shirley sang and everything. And my job as a producer was to enhance that and just get the best performance, which wasn't that hard, and then work really hard on all the parts and make it sound unified and clean and no mistakes, but natural at the same time.
Yeah.
So that was how it all came together.
Yeah. Ross, tell us about your experience at the Sunbury Music Festival.
Well, my experience of Sunbury, the legendary Melbourne, Victoria rock festival, my perspective is a bit different to the general perception of how fantastic it was because I missed the first one that's there on the 3-album set with Thorpe as the god of Sunbury. And then the second or third one, I was there with Skyhooks, and they didn't go down very well, but it was a kind of early experience for them with a big audience, and they had their original singer. So then another year went by. Daddy Cool reformed, and we went back. We were asked by the Sunbury people to reform and play at Sunbury. So we did. We found this gigantic naval flag, Australian flag, and we hung it behind us, right? And so Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. And Skyhooks, I think, were on the same year. And they were just starting to break out.
With Shirley.
With Shirley playing. And the album, it's 1974.
Yep.
And I remember being there. Daddy Cool went down pretty well. Being there with them, and they were the next big thing. The expectation was huge. And I was off in the wings singing harmonies with them, having a bit of a good time and just fleshing out the harmonies with the band, And they went down pretty well from what I remember. But the thing that was bad about that festival was Deep Purple were the headliners.
That's right.
So Sunbury, the gloss had worn off a bit because people were sick of going out in mud and heat and da-da-da. So the first one was legendary, and then they started to become a bit wind down. So by the time we got to our one, Deep Purple, they needed a big headline act. So Deep Purple they didn't sell enough tickets, basically. So Deep Purple got all the money, however much that was, decamped, and everyone else was left going, we can't afford to pay you. So we'd got asked to reform, and then we didn't get paid. So
you eventually got paid?
Not really, because the musicians' union was, it was too late to get onto Deep Purple and get the strength of the union movement to stop them leaving the country. They'd gone already before everybody else found out they weren't going to get paid. So when they came back, whenever it was 10, maybe 12, 15 years later, the Musos Union said, you have to, before you can come back in, you have to pay the musicians who were dudded.
Really?
Yeah, but get this, on scale. So if you were like a 3-hour call or something, you go $30, as what they would pay somebody in an orchestra or something.
Yeah.
So we all ended up with about $30 each.
What was the year when Queen got booed off the stage.
Oh, maybe that's the year that Skyhooks were there. I can't. It gets a bit blurred.
Yeah, right.
I think that's the year. I was out there to see Skyhooks that year. That was the next year.
Yeah.
And everyone was waiting for Queen, who weren't very well known at that stage. They had like one album or something. Who are these guys, And there was all the aggro, Aussie roadies who didn't like them because they were all makeup and all of that sort of stuff. So they made, and I can see why this happened. They actually made people, like, there was a big long break because they were waiting for the sun to go down so they could use their light show.
Of course.
Right? But nobody knew that. So everyone's going, where are these guys? I'm bored, And I'm sitting down near the front and waiting for them to come on. They came on and they did some of the early repertoire. I couldn't tell you what the songs were.
No.
But they didn't go down that. They actually won people over,
Okay.
There had been some aggro from, I think, Chuggy and, and a few others about them.
Yeah.
And roadies and all that. But, I've got an open mind. I wanted to see what these guys would do. So they're not bad. And then they came back on, so they must have got an encore.
Right.
So they weren't booed off stage.
No.
And they played, I think it was Jailhouse Rock. Oh. And I went, hey, they could really cut it, it was really good. And it wasn't just, songs you'd never heard before.
Yeah,
and they carved up the old song, and guitar, Brian May's wailing away. And it's like, oh, okay. So I went away going, oh, they're okay,
Yeah.
And I think that's the general perception from an audience thing. So you've got to watch how these stories build.
Of course.
And, it's maybe some, body who got up there and dissed them had to go and support their dissing.
Yeah, that's
over
right.
the years,
Ross, last question, because we've run out of time. Australian music. Firstly, is it important to have the Australian Music Vault to preserve these stories?
Well, I guess it is because, for instance, I've been setting the record right a bit,
Yeah.
And it'll be like Rashomon. You'll get someone else talking about Sunbury and then it'll be like a completely different view.
That's right.
You got to figure out which is... There's no correct view. It's all subjective.
And is there a distinctive Australian sound?
Now that you've kind of got me there, I'm not sure about that. And for instance, everyone goes, Eagle Rock's a great Australian song. And yet it comes out of a very strong blues tradition.
Written in London.
Started in London.
Yeah.
Finished in Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
played by Australians. I think there probably is.
And we're grabbing from everywhere. Maybe that's the fact.
I think that's it. I mean, if you think of one of the bands I love, which also came out of a roots kind of situation originally with Jerry Humphries up front, The Loved Ones. I think as long as it's a distinctive sound, Skyhooks, that's definitely Australian because they sang about Australian things and they did it with their own unique sound. Later on, I did similar things when I was having, thoughts about what am I doing living in Australia, and I wrote Living in the Land of Oz, and it's got a lot of content about, race relations and the land and all of that with a reggae beat, which was very early kind of, was faux reggae, reggae rock.
Yeah.
But stitched together in a different way. And I don't think there's too many records that sound like that.
No. Ross Wilson, thank you very much.
Thank you.